Hi, Mystery Resurfaced here. Today I'm going to explain to you an Italian romance drama film Malèna released in the year 2000. The movie tells a story about a teen kid named Renato Amoroso. He encounters three significant occasions. The extremist dictator Benito Mussolini declares that Italy is entering World War II. He gets another bicycle. He sees interestingly, along with his companions, the wonderful and erotic Maddalena, Malèna, Bonsignore Scordìa, and how the story goes on. Watch ahead. A 12-year-old boy named Renato who receives his new bike. Renato rides back to his friends when he arrives. They ask him to sit on the side. They are fascinated as they watch Malèna walk down the street. Malèna is the daughter of their Latin teacher, Professor Bonsignore. As she moves past them, the gathering hurries away on their bicycles on numerous occasions, attempting to keep their eyes on her. Renato gazes seriously at her, and appreciates her. Later on, they head to their Latin class. Renato notices the whole day, still in awe at Malèna's beauty. The following day Renato played hooky and rides to Malèna's home, where he have dreams about Malèna, shouting to him and requesting cigarettes. After all, his fantasy is stopped as he gazes at Malèna's home as the entryway is shut. At home his dad is enraged at him for playing hooky. Soon thereafter, Renato slips away his room and goes to Malèna's home. He climbs a tree, peeps through an opening in the window and looks inside the house, finding Malèna lying on a lounge chair. He watches Malèna stroll around paying attention to the music before he notices a photograph of her husband Nino Scordìa. On the next day, the men talk about Malèna and how she showed up in their town without Nino, who's at present battling in the war. After his haircut, Renato returns to Malèna's home, keeping an eye on her with a telescope and watching her the entire day. Later in the evening, Renato comes to Malèna's home, topping through a holder watcher. Later on, she begins hitting the dance floor with an image of Nino, while a tune plays behind the scenes. The next day, Renato heads to the music store and purchases a duplicate of the tune playing in Malèna's house once home. He plays the tune while taking a look at unrefined photographs of ladies, and envisions them. The next day, Renato rejoins his companions as they dash to find Malèna once more. Then, at that point, he comes up with a trick to leave his companions prior to getting up to speed to Malèna. When he sees her, the men from the town are watching her stroll along the street. Unexpectedly, a dental specialist Cusimano, welcomes her, kissing her hand. Continuing on, Malèna looks at Lieutenant Corti as she shows up at her destination. Renato sees her getting a key for an entryway. Later on, Renato heads to a maintenance to fix his bicycle. Furthermore, from that point, he spots Malèna once more. Renato was as yet astounded by her excellence, while the ladies in the town sickened by Malèna's presence. One of the ladies thinks about her as Gina, an escort in the city. Malèna sets out toward the residence once more, with Renato actually following her. He then, at that point, climbs the door close by, uncovering to be her dad. During their morning exercise, one of Renato's companions notifies that Nino Scordìa has passed on in the war. Later, Renato goes to a commemoration for Nino. In the wake of leaving, Renato gets back to Professor Bonsignore's residence, and sees Malèna in bed, crying in grief over the loss of her husband. In Renato's creative mind, he goes to Malèna's side, soothing and assuring her that he'll show up for her before Malèna embraces him. After the burial service parade, the townspeople starts gossiping and defaming Malèna, disturbing Renato and outraging him to spit in their drinks and urinate in their bags. After leaving, Renato before long spots Malèna leave a store. The men from the store talk about her roughly, and when Renato hears this, he tosses a stone at the store, then writing continually. From that point forward, Renato sits near Malèna's house. When Malèna enters her home, Renato strolls over to her yard and snatches a couple of her underwear. The following day, Renato's dad strolls into Renato's room, observes him still sleeping with the underwear hung over his head. His dad tosses an accomplishment. Let Renato know that he's embarrassed about him. While the remainder of Renato's family gets on ensuing to warn him, Renato's dad locks him inside his room, while Renato's mom destroys the underwear. Following 3 days pass, Renato's mom is worried for her child who hasn't eaten. At this point, the next day, a doctor visits Renato to beware of him, informing him that he really wants natural air outside. A while later, Renato rides his bicycle to Malèna's home once more. The roads are currently loaded up with different men gazing at Malèna's home. In the class, unexpectedly a man comes in and hands a letter to Professor Bonsignore. The letter tells that his girl has been sleeping with the entire town. Shattered, the teacher leaves his class and the students are passed on to chatter about the letter. Offended, Renato battles one of the students. Around evening time, Renato gets back to Malèna's home, and finds Lieutenant Scordìa inside Malèna's home. Renato was infuriated by what he sees, particularly when Lieutenant Scordìa kisses Malèna on his way out. The lieutenant chances upon Specialist Cusimano. The dental specialist berates him for bothering Malèna, who is his fiancée. Specialist Cusimano slaps Lieutenant Scordìa first. Then they two battle until Specialist Cusimano's wife shows up with the police. Then the police began capturing the two numbskulls. The following day, the town individuals gossip about last evening's occurrence, arguing who was to blame. Many communicated their shock over Malèna probably having two sweethearts. They mentioned that the professor already quit his teaching position in disgrace. While the people bring up that Malèna ought to go to court on account of the lower of a wedded. Back in her dad's apartment, Malèna attempts to open the entryway. However, the key doesn't fit. Renato watches, and understands that the teacher has abandoned his girl. Later on, Malèna strolls to lawyer Sentorbi's office requesting counsel, under the steady gaze of continuing to court. Inside the bustling court, Renato watches while Malèna is put to preliminary. The appointed authority continues to ask Malèna inquiries about the dental specialist and their relationship. Malèna lets the judge know that Specialist Cusimano just visited her once to give medication for her dad, and he lied about being her fiancé. When the appointed authority gets some information about Lieutenant Scordìa, Malèna lets him know that their relationship is no regulation concern. He requests that his assistant to report Lieutenant Scordìa's explanation. Disheartened, Malèna tunes in, while the representative illuminates everybody that Lieutenant Scordìa had a relaxed perspective on his relationship with Malèna. Lawyer Sentorbi then begin talking energetically, protecting Malèna and accusing Specialist Cusimano as Malèna is just sin of her magnificence beauty. She just needs to carry on with a. Later on, Malèna and Sentorbi joyfully head back and move, while Renato watches from the window. Later, Sentorbi abruptly takes his action on her. He tells her that the main installment he needs is Malèna herself. Renato moves to somewhere else to track down a superior view, however it breaks, making the kid fall. The following day at school, Renato keeps on thinking about Malèna and envision his teacher as Malèna. A short time later, Renato was with his family in the tailor's shop to buy long pants fit for him. After leaving the tailor's shop, Renato then keeps an eye on Sentorbi, who is visiting his mom. He laughs when his mom hits him in dissatisfaction with regards to Malèna. From that point forward, Renato follows lawyer and finds him along with Malèna. There they cut off their friendship. This fills Renato with joy. After this, Renato keeps on following Malèna. While men along the roads are messing with her, out of nowhere, she suddenly slows down. When Renato sees this, he imagines that Malèna is strolling towards him. To his mistake, Malèna strolls past him and approaches Antonio, a man who gives her food. Out of nowhere, there is a blast around. Thereafter the bombarding run. Renato hurries to one of the destroyed structures where soldiers pull Professor Bonsignore's body. Soon after, Malèna, along with her dad, students joined the memorial service parade. After the memorial service, Malèna gets back home and begins trimming her hair. While Renato was watching outside, suddenly a vehicle out of nowhere drives up to Malèna's house, making Renato to hide. Antonio thumps on Malèna's door, and Malèna invites him inside from the opening in the window. Renato was in tears as he watches. Antonio promptly forced himself on Malèna. Seeing this, Renato returns home in rage. The following day, Renato strolls alongside the city. Seeing Malèna, her excellence totally entranced him, as Malèna now has red hair. The men around her examine in awe and the ladies take a look at her skeptically. While she advances toward a table, she begins to get a cigarette and every one of the men around her offers a lighter. The following day, Renato watches inside the hairstyling parlor. He sees Malèna with blonde hair. Renato envisions how Malèna manages them in their hotel, before he ultimately passes out. Due to Renato's parents take more time to the church where they have him exorcise, as his mom accepts that Satan has him. From an external perspective, Renato's dad cries and trusts that Renato just needs to lay down with a lady to fix him. After the customs, Renato's dad takes him to a brothel and inside, Renato cautiously picks a lady. The two then climb to a room where they start connecting. Out of nowhere, a gathering of ladies tempests of building, and they pull out Malèna. The ladies begin beating her in the city, and they remove and tear her clothes. Renato couldn't do a thing as the ladies trim her hair. When they are finished with, Malèna is left powerless and bloodied, shouting out in agony and embarrassment, before the ladies cast her away. Soon after Renato rides to a train station and sees Malèna boarding the train. While never talking with a lady he longs for the most, and Renato watches. Back in town, a vehicle stops and a man gets out of it. As he is strolling along the roads, individuals remember him, uncovering the man to be Nino Scordìa, as far as anyone knows Malèna's dead husband. Renato follows Nino. He enters his previous home, amazed to observe displaced people there and that his wife had vanished. Renato keeps on following Nino while he advances into an office. There he understands what happened to Nino. It turns out, he endures the conflict and everybody in this town spreads false rumors about his death. Nino then frantically requested that the official assist him with finding his wife. Around evening time Nino gets back to his home, sitting by the bed. Nino is in profound idea, when unexpectedly Renato drops a letter besides to him. Nino attempts to pursue the kid. He discovers that Malèna had generally been devoted to him with his disclosure. Nino boards a train while Renato watches. Time passes and the town goes on with its usual day. After a year, Renato is seen with a girl, while Nino and Malèna return to town and are seen walking around the town. Ladies notice she presently looks all the more motherly and plain, regardless of whether still excellent. Since she is as yet hitched and living by and by with her husband, individuals never again think of her as a danger, and start talking about her and to her with more regard in the market. While Malèna finished shopping, Renato comes up on his bike, and he watches Malèna from far away on her journey home. While she heads back home, some fruits tumbles from her bag, and Renato hurries to get it. He wishes her best of luck and she gives him a mysterious half-grin smile, and it's the main time Malèna and Renato have a base association in the entire story.